Hi, everyone, and welcome to Kembali 2020, a Rebuild Bali festival. This is a digital program designed to inspire, excite, reconnect, and revitalize the Balinese and Indonesian community from October 29 to November 8, 2020. Kembali, the Indonesian word for return or comeback, represents revitalization in the face of global challenges. The festival will unite people in Bali and Indonesia together with an international audience at a time when travel is largely impossible and creating connections is more important than ever before. My name is Cynthia Dewi Oka, and I am an Indonesian poet and writer, originally from Denpasar, Bali. My family migrated to Canada in 1995 when I was 10 years old, but for the past 8 years, I've been living in the United States. I am very excited to be talking today with one of my literary heroes, Edwige Danticat. Edwige was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and emigrated to the US in 1981. She is the author of numerous critically acclaimed works spanning not only multiple genres, but geographies and generations. She is a 2009 MacArthur Fellow and the winner of the 2018 Neustadt Prize for Literature. Her book, The Art of Death, Writing the Final Story, was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award for Criticism in 2017, and her latest work, Everything Inside, which I devoured in one sitting, won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Best Fiction last year in 2019. Edwige, thank you so much for making the time to talk with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
I want to start by asking, how are you and how is your family doing?
I'm doing okay, and given everything, and my family's doing all right. For the last couple of months, we've been here in Miami with my daughters and my mother-in-law, who spends a lot of time in Haiti. And so this morning was a kind of a sad moment for our family. She decided to return to Haiti today. So we're actually just coming back from the airport, and so we're a little sad about that. But yeah, we're hanging in there.
Have the social the new normal, the social, political, economic conditions created by the pandemic. I mean, this is obviously affecting your family with what's happening right now. And last time when we talked, you were managing the kids who are in school virtually as well. And I'm wondering as well, has it affected also your writing practice during this time? And if so, how?
Well, I think when in March, when we all first kind of went inside, when I have two daughters, when they stopped going to school, and we had to sort of limit our emotions. Initially, it was really kind of nesting, right? Making sure everyone was okay, making sure everybody is home. The schooling was going okay, and our neighbors, some of whom are elder people who are alone, making sure everybody was set, because in Florida, we have a kind of a culture of like just getting ready for an announced disaster, because we have hurricane season, right? And whenever that happens, so I remember when I first started going to the supermarkets to get supplies, it had that same kind of feeling where people were just like really rushing, and we didn't know how long and what this was exactly. But as the months went on, there was, of course, a lot of sadness. My parents had friends. Both my parents have passed on long ago, but they have friends who have also passed on from this. And then, you kind of gradually move into this new reality of even new ways of communicating with people, new ways of seeing people, and also new ways of grieving, because you can't really go and see people. And of course, in the area that I'm, there's a lot of hardship, because again, in Miami, it's a culture that's based on a lot of tourism. and and hospitality, and so a lot of people lost work. So it's a continuing crisis, certainly around here. Personally, for me, I have not been able to really concentrate on longer work. I've been trying to write mostly shorter pieces. In a way, it's kind of like going back to more of your kind of like your type of practice as a poet, right? And even though I know that some poems might take a long time, but I think it's easier. I found it easier to work in these shorter type of bursts. How about you?
Um, I have actually, what's interesting is during the pandemic, initially very similar with what's going on. I'm in New Jersey. So initially we were hit really hard. And it looks like cases are rising again for the winter season. But we were pretty on top there with kind of the spread of infections. And we don't have any family around. My family, they're either in Indonesia or in Canada. So we're like 3,000 miles apart. And I actually made a big shift with like leaving a national organizing job like in the middle of the summer because there was just too much to take care of. Like everything had to be contained inside the house and a lot more reproductive labor. And I was also finding that just emotional equilibrium in the family took more time to manage because it's just anxieties are so high. My son is entering his final year of high school. And I actually expanded my writing practice from poems to short stories during this time because I was finding that it gave me a form to sort of leave reality for a little bit, if that makes sense. Kind of
Absolutely.
In this other space. Yeah.
Like to leave a little bit of the usual, which
That's right.
which I find for me in writing essays at this time is kind of documentation, which is really mostly what I've been writing, and because in terms of responding to something as opposed to just kind of just like tugging something out of myself, like whole cloth, right? Like inventing feels a little bit futile in this moment. And I know that when I do get another burst, there'll be like it would have been building up, but right now it just feels like my biggest urge feels more towards documenting. Like I feel like I want to, when I look back, if I'm blessed enough to still be here like 10, 20 years from now, I want to look back and say, oh, this is what I was thinking and this is what I was feeling. And so it's almost like I feel like these pieces that I'm writing now, whether they're related to the moment or not, but they will still be markers for me that I'll still be able to recall what was happening around them.
Right. This is a perfect segue because you're talking about documenting this moment. And from our last conversation, just chatting briefly on the phone, I noticed, you are an extremely astute and attentive observer of political life, including here in the United States, especially right now. And something I've been thinking about is that as immigrant artists, we often have an expanded frame just by virtue of the fact that we've lived in or been shaped by other parts of the world, other histories, other kinds of political cultures that are, actually really affected by US politics, but often sort of silenced within the discourse. And growing up in Indonesia, for example, under the New Order regime, it like shaped everything from my access to literature because of censorship and also dynamics within my family because there was so much fear. And you are a historian as well, right? In many respects of your people, both in Haiti and in diaspora. So I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you're making sense of some I think that, the language of the rise of authoritarianism in the US has become rather mainstream now. A lot of people are commenting on this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as a Haitian American artist.
Well, I think you're right about that extended frame, in the sense that it's, after the murder of George Floyd, I wrote an article in the New Yorker called "So Brutal a Death" that gave me an opportunity to, like, concretely define sort of everything I was feeling in that moment of George Floyd and what I was hearing from many immigrant families around me. For example, when I remember one of the first protests I went to was in my, when I was about 19, 20, and Yusuf Hawkins, a young man, had been killed when he went into Bensonhurst to buy a car, and 30 white young men killed him. And part of what I remember, like what struck me about that, I mean, I knew about racism, but it seemed to me kind of like the torture that was part of so many of these, of the dictatorship we had fled, or things you hear about totalitarian regimes around the world where someone can be persecuted and like really executed publicly for who they are, for what they look like, and so forth, and then and how that's reacted to, of course, has a lot to do with what the state represents. Is the state a friend of the person who has his knee on the neck of the person on the floor, or is the state a friend of the person on the floor? Is the state defending the person on the floor? So this was, one of these moments where the way people reacted had a lot to do with sort of what kind of society we were living in. And sadly, we saw the power of the populace, right? The power of people to rise. But what we were getting from the top was like very different. And so much of what's happening now, you could see, like, is stuff that the United States used to chastise other countries about, right? Like just the calling for the arrest, or even, contributing to like the near assassination of people who are your enemies, calling the press the enemy of the people, all of these, like these slides down towards authoritarianism. It's just really, it's very frightening, but it's recognizable to, I think, a lot of people who have lived through it before. For example, we there are people now who are like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do election night? What if there's, what if there's violence, and things that really people who are voting, it's not out of the realm of possibility that if you're in one of those states, you're going to vote and some armed people might be driving by you, intimidating you, right? That's not happening elsewhere. So I think that's something that a lot of other people, if you've lived under certain regimes, you recognize. But then I think now more and more Americans are also starting to recognize that they're sliding in a very scary direction for their country.
Yeah, it's I kept saying in the last 4 years that there were just moments of deja vu, just even in the ways that people around me were talking. Like it felt like this separation and also conflation at the same time of the past and present. And the kind of paradox right now, I think I'm struggling with, where we have obviously Trump being like this strong man, or posing as this strong man leader, and a kind of vacuousness in alternative forms of leadership right now. That is both. It's like I think we're all, as many of us are obviously trying to course correct, do whatever we can to course correct. I'm like organizing with the Indonesian community right now here to try to turn out votes. And what do you, I think just kind of to follow up on that, are there sort of like lessons that you have learned from your particular history in terms of how to face this moment of incredible uncertainty and repression in many ways?
Well, I think one of the things that people have over relied on that's proving to be sort of shaky ground is the checks and balances, right? People are like, oh yeah, that one happened because we like, they'll catch it with these, like the judiciary will catch it, the legislature will catch it. And I think this period has shown us the sort of the precariousness of these checks and balances, right? And that's what that's how authoritarianism happened, like the erosion of these checks and balances. Like the press, the legislature, the judiciary, and those things are more and more eroding away. But one thing that we have seen, and I think that's been somewhat reassuring in this past period, especially after the murder of George Floyd, is that people are willing, to take to the streets and to make, to peacefully protest and make their voices heard. And it was shocking how many people were doing it in a pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And that shows you the urgency of the situation. For me, and we've seen how many people have started voting early. I think that's I've gone through these ebbs and flows, and where people were really active in the movement against apartheid, for example, and there was a whole time where people seemed like they was kind of not reacting, and then there was the war in Iraq where people were protesting, and now I think now it's just kind of young people, and you have like multi-generational, multiracial coalitions. I think that to me is hopeful. Like that's the streets, the people are the checks and balances now, and I think people have realized that. Like we can't count on, just to see what's happening. We can't count on these government bodies. Like we can't count on the attorney generals. We can't count on the Supreme Court. We can't. So we have us. I think that's what that was really the power of that. And we've seen it all over the world the last couple of months, right? Where people have almost seemed like in a time where we're supposed to be self-isolating, where people have realized, have rediscovered the power of their numbers together. Like if they show up together for a cause. And that's what we saw all summer when it was actually dangerous to be next to another person. But people realize the power in numbers, which is a very powerful counter to everything. And there are places where people have done it, like in Haiti the last year. People have been protesting against their president, and they've done it against a lot of violence, a lot of risk to their lives. But people still come out in Haiti and Belarus and all these other. In large numbers, and we saw it on the streets of America this entire summer, and I think that's what will be on the other end of whatever happens. Like we know that people are ready to show up.
That's right. That's right. There is hope to be had and to be cultivated, and I want to pivot right now to talking about everything inside. Because I think partly also, to me, I can't really see it as separate, like the fact that there has been, in the last couple of decades, more and more voices from diasporas, from Black authors in particular, like really claiming and fighting for an accurate retelling of the many histories, right? And under histories that have been suppressed in the context of the United States, for example. It's been a long fight for people to just be able to tell their stories and to like make characters and historical figures come to life, because it's really like we need models. I think that in an age of social media and an age of hyper isolation as a result of neoliberal policies that have kind of splintered communities, it's almost like that this is where a lot of people are finding their community, is also through literature. And I have several questions, particularly about your new book. And I thought it was really interesting because I read it early this year, actually just about when the pandemic hit. And I was like, this is like a prophetic title, everything inside.
So, or everyone inside.
Everyone inside. Yeah. And I thought it was interesting that there isn't actually a corresponding titular story within the collection. Mm-hmm. Which means like, so this is like the title for this particular collection is so important for kind of framing our experience of all of the stories within it. Can you share how you arrived at this title and what it means to you in relation to this body of work specifically?
Well, it's interesting. I'm glad you noticed that there isn't like a title story, because I really didn't want a title story, because I think in collections sometimes the title story like guides you to a story that is supposed to be the most important story in the collection. And I really wanted every story to have equal footing. But the title, Everything Inside, comes, I live in Little Haiti in Miami. It's a gentrifying neighborhood here. And one day I was walking down, around my neighborhood, and I saw a sign in a window that says, "Nothing inside is worth dying for." And there was like a target and like a big bullseye on the sign. And I realized, oh, it's one of those warning signs. I mean, that it's basically like the equivalent of stay out. But I thought this is pretty verbose, right? For as a warning, like why so many words? Right. But then I thought, oh, it should be like everything inside, right? Like it just seems kind of like a strange thing. And then I thought I have to put that in a story, because it just it just kind of captured. And so we decided to initially the full title of the collection was "Everything Inside is Worth Dying For." And then I was joking with my editor. I was like, the critics would have fun with that. They'll be like, "Hey, nothing in here is worth dying for." And so we decided to just call it "Everything Inside" for short.
Wow. I'm so glad you told that story. Wow. Yeah. Okay. That actually does change, because I think there was, I think for me, definitely the first impression was kind of like a holding of every single, person within the book. And this kind of like gathering, like I can just like see it. It's like you gathering and like with arms around. So I think this adds another layer that to know sort of like what was the initial full title of the storybook. And I really loved the range and the complexity of lives to be found here. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I really saw each story as kind of like a case study of the ways in which, history, race, gender, class, positioning inside of the nation or the diaspora, how they intersect in a particular moment or situation. And at the same time, there's this fidelity, this like incredible faithfulness to almost like recording and really to like really witnessing the particular agencies and fears and desires of each character. It's like it's both um and this is actually like a very consistent characteristic of your work that I teach in my class, in my fiction class, because something I really deeply admire is that it's like no one is unimaginable for you. And there's like this flexibility of mind and heart and language that I think we really, really need right now. Can you share with us what your process is for getting to know your characters?
Well, I like the notion of like the embrace of everybody, because I think that goes to the process of creating characters or rather recording characters, is that for me, like I have to love them on some, in some way. Even if I disapprove of them, there has to be something redeemable about them to me. And I can't really judge them. So I feel like I have to be at least intrigued by them. So one of the things, I think in character formation is that the characters one creates are like the people we meet, right? They're people you meet and you're just like, oh my God, I feel like I've known you my whole life, right? And then there are people that it takes a while to tease out a relationship with them, and it builds on, certain moments. And so there are characters that are like that come just really fully formed, and then others that you just really have to go and write several drafts before you fully get them. Certainly, in the first characters in the book Dosa, that whole group of characters. For me, that was many layers of writing until I could tease out like the distinctive element of each of them and how they come together and how they come apart, and that sort of like comes together as you're writing, as I was writing. And others, like in Hot Air Balloons, those two characters just came faster because I, sort of like I knew people like that in college, and so so that kind of like that idealism I recognize, and I have nieces, my young relatives in college that I'm just like, oh, I know this person, I know these people, I know that idealism, I know that sort of like drive also, they're kind of both, each character is one side of the same person. The person who is like, the best I can commit to society right now is getting A's, and then the other one who is like, I want to serve, I want to sit in, I want to, travel and help. And so those characters came together a lot, like more, they're like the ones that you're just like, oh, I've known you my whole life. And then the others are just like, I have to gradually get to know you better.
Are there particular ones that felt like in the book that felt particularly hard to access for you? Like, I really don't like this person, but build some sort of relationship to them.
In this book, no. In other books, like in The Dew Breaker, which is a book about a man who's a torturer, that one was hard, like the writing about a torturer. But still with him, I had to what's redeemable about this man, right? Who has tortured people, who basically tricked this woman into marrying him, but who grew to love him. So that character was a very hard character to write. But a couple of years after, I was doing an event, and a man came up to me and said, I read your book, and I want you to know that we had no choice. Like, he was like one of those people. He was that guy. God. Yeah. And he said, if we didn't do that, then we would be killed. And it was like, now he had a soccer club, he helped kids, but like literally when he was walking up to me, it was like out of the central casting for that character. It was like, if I were casting someone for the movie, this guy would be the character. So sometimes, and I felt like if I had met him before, I probably would be like, oh, this is so cheesy. Like the torturer who redeems himself, like, and now helps kids, like who's going to believe this stuff? I couldn't have written his, but there he was, like standing right there in front of me. But in this book, the characters, I don't know, maybe it's because a lot of them are younger women, and I'm sort of easing out of the younger woman stage of my life. I'm like in my 50s now. But I really enjoyed their company, if you will. And I remember after reading The Color Purple, in one of the editions, Alice Walker had a note. She's like, she thanked the characters for coming. And really these characters, to the one, I felt like I wanted to thank for coming. I really enjoyed writing them. The circumstances, of course, the plots were not always fun, but I felt like a really deep attachment to each and every one of them.
Yeah, as a reader, I too get I think from the other side where the stories are so successful at drawing us into their lives. And some of these characters, I remember, there's the story about the girl who lost her father.
But in the old days.
In the old days. And her mom now runs this like Haitian restaurant. And she like goes to Miami and meets her father's new wife. Mm-hmm. And their kind of dynamics. And I remember being really particularly drawn to this character because there was this like quiet anger throughout this story as she was struggling and trying to figure out how to grieve this person that she had, that obviously, is part of the reason for her being, but hasn't been in her life for all of her life. Didn't even know she existed until, she found out later. But I think that there are moments of these characters who have trouble connecting within the book that I found especially instructive right now. In a moment when it feels like we're not allowed to take a moment to grieve. Yeah. And even though the situation is different, there's like the kind of emotional wisdom and practice that is contained in the stories. I'm like, it is instructive even in the sense of knowing like it's okay to feel this way. It's okay to not know how to, and to feel like we might come to it too late. So I think that's like something I worry about a lot right now, is like how much are we not allowing ourselves to feel? And also that's partly, I think I grew up in Canada, and sort of all of the things that my parents had suppressed while we were living in Indonesia sort of kind of mushroomed and intensified in this kind of new context. And it's like, I know it's a source of trauma for me and like fear. And those stories in particular really helped me kind of like hold that space for myself. So just incredible thanks for writing it. And I also
thank you. But you know what? I think one of the things like I feel run through the stories even before this moment for me was rituals, right? Yeah. And how certain rituals are disrupted, certainly by migration, right? Yeah. Our ability to even be in the same country. Because, for example, my parents, when I was 2 and my dad moved to New York, and when I was 4, my mom joined him, and it took about 8 years for us to my brother and I to join them in New York. And when my parents were in New York and undocumented, they would still talk about it when they were older. Like the hardest part for them of being undocumented was like not being able to attend the funeral of a sibling, or or just not being able to come back for certain important moments in the family. And so it's like the way rituals are disrupted by migration, right? The way you can't be there for births or for death sometimes, and even now the way that it works is that sometimes someone dies, and I mean not even in the COVID moment, before that it took forever to bury them because everybody has to fly in from everywhere, right, to be able to attend. Or I remember when I was the church my parents attended in New York, when the shift happens where everybody who died in that, who belonged to that church, like in the 80s, they had all their funerals, their rites, everything in New York, but then the body was shipped to Haiti to be buried. And I remember like the moment, like in the mid 90s, where someone who belonged to the church was on vacation in Haiti and died, and they shipped the body to New York. And rather than like everybody, the family going there, then I was just like, whoa, it's like this moment of like the shift in the migration, right? Where there were obviously more people on this side now than on the other side. And so in that story, I think what the father's wife is still trying to uphold a sense, a few rituals, which is the struggle right now, right? Like, I can't tell you like how many Zoom type funerals or birthday parties, or like so much that we have to do just the way you and I are talking right now, and not even being able to like touch someone. My like neighbor passed away, and all we could do is stand out the window and then just like wave at her family. Whereas like when my mother died, she was in here with me. She was making us tea. She brought us food. That same neighbor, when she died, there's nothing we could reciprocate in that way. You could drop off some things, but we couldn't be really an integral part of her rituals. And it goes from that to people who can't even hold their loved one's hand in the ICU, or you say goodbye to them at the door. I think there's so much that this kind of trauma too, that we're like, when this is over, that we're going to have to recover from. My parents' minister, for example, said this thing. He said, well, when this is over, whenever that is, we'll have a memorial for everybody who died in that particular church that my parents belonged to. So, and that story, when I go back to it, when I think about it, is what I come to, like that sense of so many people we know dying out of sight, out of our reach right now, all over the world. I think that was initially one of the things that struck me the most, that you can't be with like someone you love at their most vulnerable state. Like you can't even get to say goodbye. If you're lucky, you can do it through an iPad or something. But, right. Most people don't even get that.
Yeah, that resonates so much with me. We're in exactly in that situation right now with my grandmother in LA.
Mm-hmm. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, and you're waiting, and you also can't do anything, and there's all of the pressure to keep it together. Mm-hmm. And just kind of like a loss of vacuum for us it's weird. It's like everybody has to be so disciplined right now. Yeah. Our self-management. And I think that I will most certainly be returning to these stories to kind of guide some of what happens next, like even just personally in my life. I do have a question specifically also about the story, The Gift, because in many ways, a lot of the stories that you like, I feel like almost every story here in this collection tackles a systemic, ongoing issue of some nature, whether it is something, there's like the focus is on the lives of the characters, but then you shed light on like the caregiving economy, political corruption, familial dynamics when aging and dementia enter. Like these are all very kind of like human experiences that kind of become specified and realized in these particular people's lives. In The Gift, however, you deal with the aftermath of a disaster, the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, and it's through the lens of these two ex-lovers in particular. And in some ways, like a disaster like that disrupts everything. Sort of kind of goes with what you were saying. Like, I mean, rituals, not only the doing of rituals gets disrupted, but I think that in moments like that, perhaps even the meaning of rituals can be thrown into question. Because it's such a it's like a, seismic event, like literally in this situation. Are there lessons that you feel able to share with us from the process of writing that story, almost like a decade out from the moment, right, of occurrence that we can learn when we're thinking about this moment that we're in, the global disaster that we're in?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say because we have said unprecedented so much, right? And for so many of us, it's unprecedented in our lifetime. But I think we have to, in many ways, draw from this stronger survivors among us, right? And sometimes those people are in our families, and sometimes they're in history. And so I keep thinking when it gets really tough here, I think of all the people who didn't give up, like when you watch the George Floyd murder, right? You think of all the civil rights heroes, right? And the fight is not finished, right? But there are people who stood up in equally tough times or even tougher times. And they saw possibility in change. They saw the possibility of change. So, and then when I think of, of people in my family who, my uncle who survived, like had a childhood during the US occupation of Haiti with sort of Marines who his father was hiding from, and I think to draw from the power of these stories, which also brings us to the power of stories, right? The power of storytelling, and there's enough in history to at least hold us up to see, like others have survived very difficult things to draw from that. And there are these stories in all our families. There are these stories in all our families. And maybe this is a good moment also to honor them, because the younger people among us, sometimes they're like, hey, it's like that thing that we keep trying to tell them. So maybe there might be a little more receptive at that time to hear that story about the grandparent who was heroic, in their own way. To have these sort of wells of inspiration to draw from history, but also to draw them from our own lives. And that's why, throughout this whole thing, I was partially successful to try to get my girls. I said, keep a journal, because at some point you might want to, say to your, whoever comes after you, like, look what I went through, and I, and I'm, hopefully okay. And so to have this documentation of like your journey through this moment, and others have had their journey through this moment that we can draw into other moments that we can draw inspiration from. And that's what, in that story too. And in the old days that the father's wife, I think, was trying to draw out for the young woman. She was, it's like, this is how things were in the old days, and we managed to make it here.
Man, I think you're gonna get me to journal now.
And you should. Like I said, partially
I,
successful. I said partially successful with the young ones in my family because I said it to when I said it to my niece, she was like, "Oh, it's all on Instagram." She was like, "This is kind of where I'm journaling." I said, "Well, however you journal, it's fine." But for me, what's important is the looking back because I've had my experience with journaling is that when I've journaled, I suddenly see patterns that I missed in my daily life. So I'll go back and I was like, oh, this was a free, because we kind of, I think memory sometimes, revises things for us. And when I go back to some of my journals, I'm like, oh, this was a really terrible time, and then you realize how you went through it from day to day. So that's what I feel like in my practice now is that's why it's more nonfiction based. It's like I'm not journaling as much, but I feel like these pieces that I'm writing are kind of like not just personal journal, but also a kind of journaling that incorporates the community around me, what's happening around me, in this really very 2020 that just won't give us a break.
not at all. It's,
Yeah,
start a
and, there,
website, can't
and
take
there's
break.com.
yeah, and there's still more coming of it. It's not over. Yeah.
Right. I'm really taking that to heart. I stopped journaling a couple of years ago, and for another conversation. But I think that this is really inspiring to sort of remember the value of it, of like, especially in this moment where it feels like the forces that be don't want us to reflect, to actually engage with what's going on in like a deeper level beyond just like reading, all of the social media and Twitter feeds.
Yeah, and we're so bombarded with so much information, and I have a historian friend who says that, she says it too. It's sort of like history is pierced together of these different personal narratives, and we're living through such a moment of a kind of instant revisionism that we don't know what the future narrative will be. This summer I was reading Animal Farm with my girls for one of their assignments. And I was like, oh my God, I'm living Animal Farm. Like, where they sort of rewrite the rules and you're being told, oh yeah, there were always this, and so who knows what like future narratives is. And we have this, I don't know that maybe other generations have had it, but we're having this moment where we're experiencing similar things with people all over the world who are kind of afraid of a very, we're affected by it differently, but we're all afraid of the same thing, right? And this common experience is forced on us. And I think that's also, going back to the protests after George Floyd's murder, that I think, which is also why people all over the world were able to suddenly pick this cause, because suddenly we already had a common grievance, right, with this pandemic, and then suddenly people could see, oh, this is the other grievance we have, which manifests itself in different ways around, in the different communities where we are all over the world. So I think that's also, I'm very curious to see how, and we have technology like we've never had before. We have more technology, for example, than we had, in September 11th and these other, things that felt more, global, in the wars and so forth. But there's so many more ways to record and document and save things. I'm very curious to see so how this is all written back on, and I think artists will be an important aspect of that. Artists who their stories, their witness, their interpretation of the moment, based on our how our different communities experienced it. We experienced it as individuals as well.
That's right. I think that there's also something about the pandemic where, because it's indiscriminate, right? Like coronavirus doesn't care who it touches. And I think for a long time, a lot of folks in more privileged positions perhaps we're starting to pick up on the language of um, grievances against racism, against like classism, and all of these things, but perhaps could only understand it at a theoretical level. And it's sort of like the coronavirus makes what's systemic so obvious. It rises to the top. There's like the bottom level of that everybody is vulnerable to this. And then I think it instructs people to be able to see the ways in which that is so much systemically worse for many people.
Yes,
and
that's what I was, yeah.
Knowledge was not there before. That embodied.
Yeah. That's what I was going to add is that you have, I mean, everyone's realizing also how vulnerable we are to this thing that we can't see, that can travel. And then we realize how it amplifies existing imbalances, right? So that people who are already more vulnerable in the society die more, get sick more, because they're also the most indispensable people in the society, right? They're the frontline workers, they're the essential workers. So yes, there is this, suddenly we all have a common vulnerability, especially early on when we didn't understand much about how the virus functioned. And then we realized, it's like everything else. It's killing more, more of the most vulnerable people in the population.
That's right. I have two last questions for you. They're both kind of big. And one is, even like, I feel so incredibly fortunate to be having this conversation with you. Like, it's so rare that we actually get to meet our heroes and they are who we think they are. And I personally it would be remiss of me to not say that as an immigrant kid and a young immigrant writer in particular, I really benefited and felt reparented by your work. Like, I felt raised by it, like, look, it's all messed up. This was like the first, because
thank you.
Yeah, I kept returning to it. And beyond sort of the craft, I think there were possibilities that for my life as an immigrant, a girl, a woman, a mother, that I was able to see because of your stories. And at this point, you do have a significant body of work. And I would love to hear just how sort of you conceptualize that work at this point in your life, like its arc, its intention, its impact, where you see yourself going next.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. I mean, when I started, I really was just like, it was this hunger to tell stories. And I felt like I was following Toni Morrison's dictum, like, if there's a book you want to write, but if there's a book you want to read, but that doesn't exist, write it. I'm paraphrasing that, and there were so many books that I wanted to read that didn't exist, that I felt like, oh, I want to write this story that I had not seen before. And it's like, I had seen similar stories. There's stories that nourished me just the way that you're talking. And that's like, but so I started like that, with that drive to just tell a kind of story. And I think it's important too, like, for people, for growing creatives, growing writers, to realize, yeah, it's not all sweet, and you're not always going to tell the story that people in your community want to hear. You're not always going to be embraced. But I've always believed that this idea, not everybody who criticizes you is crazy. Like, so that you also have to kind of listen to other voices. And then I followed this other thing too, that, my first editor told me, that, she said, when I finished Birth Eyes Memory, the book that you showed, she said, start something before that book is published, because that way, no matter what happens, whether it's received, because that, the good reception, bad reception, both can mess with a young writer's mind, right? The good can be like, oh my God, I'm so great, and the bad can like really like make you like freeze. So, and she said, always start something new. And that's really, I've always kept that practice. Like when I'm done with something before the other thing is published, I try to start something new to remind me that of like really that first love, that which for me is always the creation, which is always that process where the work is just mine, where it's like it's just me and these characters and the development, which is like where I feel most free, where I feel most comfortable. So really that's how I'm always starting over. At this point, I'm very concerned about repeating myself, or like just like caricaturing myself. So just looking for like really new avenues, new places of growth, and to continue in that way. And if you're an artist of color, you'll get that. People will like, oh, write about something else, or write about like like they feel like our telling our stories is in some ways limiting. But I feel like for me, it's to just like really grow and keep telling stories.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. It's such it's just like such an effect of the whiteness of the literary industry still, that it is considered that way. I remember receiving that messaging, as a young writer. And I think that your body of work really stands as testament to the radical diversity is in our people.
Yes, exactly.
And
that's so powerful. And it was so amazing to see, like, even the great Toni Morrison always had to say that. She was like, there is enough here for me to write about.
That's right. It never run out.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's so limiting, and that limit, that limited mentality goes to that aspect of like there can only be one writer from this place also, right? And that whole like publishing from we already have our Haitian writer, we already have our writer from Indonesia, we already have our writer from so I think that also it's because like people don't realize like the wealth of our the depth and the wealth of any culture. There's enough stories for like 10 lifetimes to be told by one person and several people. And so that's I think it's that is a really powerful thing to be countering as one grows as a writer in this space from a country that's misunderstood or that people don't know much about. Exactly that there is that's so much, for even in one life. I mean, if we were being fully respectful, we say there's enough in one life to write about for the rest of your life, and to not having to be like, oh yeah, when are you gonna really be a writer, and or to like in order to do that, you'd have to leave your space. If you want to do that, I mean, I think that's fine if a writer wants to do that. Like if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But for people to be just kind of like constantly, there's that famous interview with Toni Morrison. Like there's several where she's asked that question over and over. Right. And every time had a brilliant answer.
Right. I feel like you've actually already answered this final question that I had, but I wanted to, just in case you wanted to say any final words before we close out. In Create Dangerously, The Immigrant Artist at Work, you wrote, "The immigrant artist shares with all other artists the desire to interpret and possibly remake his or her own worlds. So though we may not be creating as dangerously as our forebears, though we are not necessarily risking torture, beatings, execution, though exile does not threaten us into perpetual silence, still, while we are at work, bodies are littering the streets somewhere. In the face of both external and internal destruction, we are still trying to create as dangerously as they, as though each piece of art were a stand-in for a life, a soul, a future. I feel like everything you've said really confirms this. But this book was published 10 years ago, and I'm wondering if you have any final thoughts on what that mandate means to create dangerously right now.
Well, one of the things I would change, I would expand the pronouns. His, her, they, for sure. I would be less binary there. But I think, now I would just tag on this thing that, you could tell that I'm obsessed with Toni Morrison, but that she said at a similar difficult time where she said, this is exactly when artists go to work, no self-pity, no fear. And this is when artists go to work. And it's for each of us to decide what that work means. But this is the time, that's really all I would add to it. Because on the surface, it seems like, there's so many different dangers out there now. Now it's like the danger of like the physical danger of like being next to another person with a virus raging is ill. So that limits how we can, physically organize, physically be collectives, but we also have these other methods. But I know, and I've to a lot of people who will say, it feels futile, but know to resist against that impulse that our work matters, that our contributions matters, our voices matter, our stories matter.
Thank you so much, Edwish.
Thank you. This was wonderful. Thank you for having this chat with me.
Of course, it's my honor. Everyone, Kembali 20. That was Kembali 20. That was amazing. And also, this festival was made possible with the support of the Yayasan Mudra Swari Saraswati Patron Program and their donors. The Patron Program was created to seek assistance for the survival of both festivals and the foundation. By making a valuable contribution to the Yayasan Patron Program, you'll be directly involved in delivering both festivals in due time. Your contribution will guarantee the future of Indonesia's most meaningful cross-cultural platform of words, ideas, culture, and the creative arts. Follow at Ubud Writers Festival on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, or visit ubudwritersfestival.com for more information about the Patron Program. And thank you again, Edwish, for being with us today.
Thank you.